So members of the committee that may be around the building, we really need you here for quorum. I know Councillor Bilo is in the building. I need Councillor Perks. I need Councillor Fillion.
Good morning. Would members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Good morning. Would members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
If Councillor Bilo is within earshot, I do need you in the room. So I still need Councillor Perks or Councillor Bilo.
Good morning. Would members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum?
Good morning. Good morning, Chair.
We are looking for Councillor Bilo, who we know is in the building. Councillor Perks' office has advised me he's stuck on the TTC. And Councillor DiCiano contacted me yesterday because he was ill. It's probably the King streetcar is stuck. Someone's playing road hockey.
Good morning. We're going to carry out a roll call to see if we have quorum in the room. Should we not have quorum, this meeting will continue after the lunch recess at 1:30. Councillor Campbell, Councillor Shiner, Councillor Fillion. We have 3 members, so we do not have quorum. We will resume at 1:30.
So, can I get some order in the room? Can I get my colleagues and others in the room to... Okay, I need the city staff as well to come to order here. Thank you all for coming back this afternoon. We have a quorum to go forward with the meeting. I want to welcome you to the afternoon meeting 27 of the Planning and Growth Management Committee. Welcome to the members of the committee and to other members of council in attendance, and to the members of public, and my apologies for this morning not having quorum. We would have liked to deal with it in the morning session, but I thank you all for coming back this afternoon. Councillor DiCiano did advise me yesterday that he was off ill and wouldn't be making it today, and I would expect Councillor Fillion, who was here this morning, I hope will be able to come back and join us this afternoon. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next, and you can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. We can go through the agenda if you wish now. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Not seeing any. Confirmation of the minutes, January 15th, 2018, the special meeting of January 25th, moved by Councillor Campbell. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We can go through the items on the agenda. Item number 1, PG 27.1, Echo Roof Incentive Program, application 1460 Wickman Road. There are no speakers. Is there a mover for this? Councillor Bilo. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. PG 27.2, we have speakers on it, so we will hold that. PG 27.3. 21 Don Valley Parkway, 30 Booth Avenue, 375 and 385 Eastern Avenue. Proposed modifications to the official plan amendment 231 site and area-specific policies. I know that the local council had some interest in this, and there is a motion coming for that as well, so I'll hold that down. PG 27.4, approval of the 2018 Toronto Heritage Grant Awards. Moved by Councillor Campbell. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. PG 27.5, the Townhouse and low-rise apartment guidelines. We do have speakers. PG 27.6, request for direction, Ontario Municipal Board appeal of the official plan amendment 231 and ICE area permissions. There's a confidential attachment. There are no speakers. Do you want to hold it down, or are you? Okay, Councillor Campbell would like to hold that. PG 27.7, OMB appeal of official plan amendment 231, request for directions. Did you want to hold that one as well, Councillor Campbell? Are you okay with that? So we are moving 27.7, the staff recommendations to adopt the confidential instructions. And if the confidential instructions and confidential attachment 1 are adopted, City Council authorize the public release of the recommendations in the attachments 1 and 2 as per the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, so we have PG 27.2, Consumers Next, Planning for People and Business at Sheppard and Victoria Park final report. We have a number of speakers. To those of you that are here to speak, we do have a list. You have 5 minutes. I will start the clock. You'll see it. Please try and end your time within the 5 minutes. If there are questions, committee members will pose them to you. The first person I have is Ryan Gooder, Weston Consulting. And after that, I have Joel Farber. So Ryan, we're here to hear from you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Again, Ryan Gooder here. This afternoon, I'm here on behalf of the Armenian Community Center. We've been involved in the development of the secondary plan and all of the visioning work that has been done, providing them with our planning guidance in response to what's been produced. And I have on the screen, for the benefit of a couple of comments, We did provide a series of written submissions through the evolution of the ConsumersNext study process. I've been involved in attendance in many of the meetings, discussions with staff. I do have the benefit for members of the committee that don't have the communication distributed. I do have copies of that if there's members that wish a hard copy if they don't have it, but we did provide a series of written comments, quite lengthy in number, but my intention is to highlight a few of the points of detail. I trust that members have the correspondence.
We're here listening to you. Yep.
So with that in mind, I wanted to highlight a couple of key issues that we find. First of all, the two stars here identify the properties owned by the Armenian Community Center. What exists on the lands you're probably familiar with is an iconic place of worship, an existing school, and there are plans for the center to expand. It's a broad catchment of receiving patronage both for the school and the place of worship that exists. There's a community center, and I believe other speakers will speak to some of the components of that as they feel impacted by this secondary plan. I wanted to simply highlight that we do believe overwhelmingly that there's a lot of good components in the secondary plan that reflect some of our comments as well as just good planning principles. Notably, the proposition of a replacement of office space. There's a specific policy that provides for that. It does reference the provision of non-residential floor area, and I suggest that could be strengthened to include a specific reference to office use, which is conceived of through OPA 231 provisions. We suggest that be considered. And in addition, there's a lot of good policies about angular plane references. The site in question here for the church itself is actually at the north end of the property, and it's adjacent to a mixed-use designated site here. This is the star that indicates the actual church. There's a lot of concern that the policies provide enough strength to control building placement on the north property. And we do support the introduction of the road that extends on adjoining lands to the north through from Hall Crown Place to Victoria Park. That's an important element here, we believe, for transportation connectivity. And we do support the configuration of the proposed park, which creates some separation between the place of worship and anything that would occur on the mixed-use area lands. We believe that's a very important element. There are some specific comments we have as well about ensuring that there's language, which I believe is captured for holding provisions to make sure infrastructure capacity is there for development prior to it being approved and conceived of, as well as the introduction of that road connection, again, contemporaneous with the development of those lands so that that traffic infrastructure can be accommodated. The other comment I would like to raise is that there is a suggestion of a typology of a base of 6 stories along Victoria Park. There is some recognition in the policies of this view shed, which you can see in the arrow here to the church, which is quite an elaborate spear condition and a very sort of good architecture. There is some concern that there may be a conflict with the policies. There is a recognition to protect that view. There's also other policies that suggest it be a minimum of 6 stories. Our suggestion is perhaps that be revisited to look at a transition of heights down towards the south portion of that area. With that in mind, I did want to reference one final remark briefly, and that is that there was a demonstration plan prepared, which was part of the ConsumersNext study materials. It identified a single high-rise building at the north end of what is the mixed-use area as depicted by my pen on the screen.
I need you to sum up, please.
Yeah, the comment, sir, is essentially we'd like to have that be endorsed for the purposes of the policy framework, because we are concerned that a number of tall buildings would be an imposition to the Armenian Community Center lands, the church itself, and want to create some separation there. So with that in mind, our letter is there, and I thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you, Ryan. Are there any questions of the deputant? Not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have Joel Farber. And after that, I have Sarouj Kulistian. Same thing, Joel. You've got your 5 minutes. Are you set up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joel Farber, I'm the solicitors for the owners of a large 9.4 acre property which sits very central to the secondary plan area. What you have on the site right now is 150,000 square feet in a couple of buildings of light industrial typology, dating obviously back some decades. The buildings are, not fully utilized, and really the industrial form is not being utilized by the existing tenants. The majority of the tenants in there right now are institutional. There's a school, there's extracurricular activities, and there's some daycare, and there's some small office uses. So there is an opportunity there for the right project to come along to help enhance and utilize this site. And what I'm here asking the committee to consider is a couple changes that I think will improve not only the outlook for this site, but the secondary plan principles as a whole. And so there's a couple issues that I want to raise. The first is, I think the secondary plan and in the planning objectives could be improved by eliminating the density restrictions for the employment areas. I think that is something that this committee needs to consider and ask staff to go back to. The vast majority of employment lands in the City of Toronto are not subject to density restrictions. Those are things that we normally associate and properly associate with the mixed-use areas, and other areas in the city, but not the employment areas. It's significantly different than what you see in many other employment areas. And I think by including density restrictions in the official plan, we could be undermining the future growth of this district for employment uses, which is really the planning principle I think that the secondary plan seeks to achieve. It doesn't, to me, I think we would be better off just maintaining the density restrictions in the zoning bylaw which currently exist. And if a development proposal were to come along that seeks to go beyond the zoning permissions, which I think are 1.5 times density, then those would be, have to be justified through the development application process, the zoning application process. But the imposition of that density restriction in the official plan really takes it to another level and could impair or impact, the ability or the risk tolerance of a development proponent to take on that kind of case, to build something beyond the 1.5. And we've looked at the 1.5 for this site in particular, and we don't see it as really being a viable development option. I mean, either you do low density in the form of what you have now in terms of some commercial activity, or you do a higher density. The 1.5 really caps you, in the 3 to 6 story range, depending on the built form, and you can't really achieve an office building of even the size that exists currently on the other properties today. You have 10-story office buildings on the other properties today, but they're all serviced by at-grade parking, so that's why the densities are so low. But obviously, the policies don't even permit that anymore, and nor would you want to build that. So I think that my submission to you would be to ask staff to go relook and what is the rationale that we have the 1.5, that we're imposing the 1.5 times density in the official plan, and really potentially restricting development opportunities in the future for the employment areas. The alternative would be maybe there is a different number that's capable of supporting, say, a 10 or 12 story office building or something even higher. and that we should go back and look at that. I don't really have the number in mind, but I know that 1.5 won't even accommodate most mid-rise buildings.
Can I get you to sum up?
Yes. So the other objective that I asked the committee to look at is, for this particular site, there is a proposed restriction on commercial uses. I acknowledge that it does come from the site and area specific plan that exists, but this site does have the potential to accommodate single-story, purpose-built to retail and commercial development that could serve both the employment areas, something like a restaurant or a retail store, a grocery store, and I think those would be viable uses for the site. They could serve the emerging community, but unfortunately the secondary plan would prohibit those, even though they're permitted in other areas within the plan.
Thank you, Joel. Are there questions of the deputant? So, Councillor Fillion.
Yeah, could you just elaborate on just that last point? How does it restrict, how does the secondary plan restrict someone putting in a restaurant, for example?
Yeah, the policies in the plan don't allow a single-purpose building in the business interior district. So I could do a restaurant pad on the immediately adjacent property, which is in the Main Street, Consumers Road, Main Street. But because of the policy and the plan, I'm not sure the number, I have it in my letter, but says you can only do the commercial uses in the interior district within an office building and on the lower floor. So I couldn't do a single-purpose restaurant pad, but they could do it right next door to me.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Farber, so this isn't the first time that this plan has been out. You've had discussions on these matters with city staff?
Yes, we have. Our planning consultants have met with city staff.
And their response to your concerns was?
Oh, their response to my concerns, or their response, and I cannot, staff will speak to this, but my understanding is that the density restrictions are really being driven by the traffic capacity. And that's really the underpinning of why the density restrictions are there. But the reality is, these are existing designated general employment lands that don't have an official plan density restriction. The mixed use areas, the emergence of all of the population growth and of course all the background traffic is what's driving the traffic constraints. And what the plan, inadvertently does is make the existing land users in the interior, especially in the business park interior district, basically they keep them at the status quo to enable all of the growth all around them.
So in other words, traffic's not really good right now, and they're trying to maintain a level of development that won't make it much worse by putting a density number on top of it?
No, what they're doing is they're accommodating all of the additional traffic capacity through the growth in the mixed-use areas while they're leaving the interior business parks essentially to fend for themselves without any viable development. The interior business park properties are not sharing in any of the development potential, really, that's being associated with the growth, including the transit. They're being essentially capped at their status quo permissions that have been in place for decades. And if you look at the time horizon of the plan, you're talking about another 25 years that says you can't change.
But that's based on their assessment of the traffic capacity in the area now.
But that's not right. You can't inequitably treat the people that were there first.
Okay, well, we'll see afterwards staff comments. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you for coming, Mr. Farber.
Just a quick one.
Of course, Councillor Buck.
Thank you. So what's the FSI that is proposed in here?
Well, there's no development application, yeah.
But there's certain heights.
I don't believe there's actually a height restriction, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I have Sarouj Kulistian, is that pronounced right?
That's right.
Oh, I did okay there. And then Harut Kasabian after? Okay, so again, 5 minutes. Please, you can watch the clock.
I'll try my
I don't
best.
have to cut
Oh,
you
it's
off.
over there, okay.
Thank you.
So, fellow committee members, my name is Suresh Kalustian. I'm a board member of the ACC Armenian Community Center and would like to say a few words on behalf of the Armenian community in regards to this official plan amendment. And based on my analysis of the secondary plan, I propose a few possible changes. I do want to thank our planning consultants and also members of the community here from the church and the school who will voice their concerns, and hopefully they'll be heard today. I'd like to start off by explaining the Armenian Community Center's history at 45 Hallcrown Place. So our community center was originally located at Avenue Road and DuPont Street, and in the 70s we needed more space and growth. So His Worship Mayor Mel Lastman of City of North York suggested at the time to purchase the 2.5 acres located at 45 Hallcrown Place, because a developer was proposing to build an 8-story building similar to the existing on the Universal site adjacent to the property, and the mayor was not in favor due to the traffic congestion on Consumers Road. So he encouraged community to move to North York, where we can build our community facilities, the center, the church, and a school in a quiet employment area. Currently, the Armenian Community Center at 45 Hallcrown and the Youth Center at 50 Hallcrown Place are facilities that serve a variety of organizations, not just the St. Mary's Armenian Church and the ARS School Daycare. These two operate as separate entities. We have cultural organizations, sports organizations, youth, women, and seniors organizations, which all operate within these facilities as social, cultural, and Christian educational hub of the Armenian community, living mostly within the surrounding neighborhoods of Sheppard Avenue, East Victoria Park, north and south of Highway 401. We are proud to mention that our sports organization, Home Minutemen, will celebrate its centennial this year. It was established in 1918 and has 47 branches worldwide with over 40,000 members. In Toronto, the organization has 20 sports teams of different age groups, and they are the largest Canadian Boy Scouts, Girl Guides branch in all of Canada. The Armenian Relief Society is 95 years old with about 50 branches in 40 countries and recognizes as NGO by the United Nations, the only women's organization as such. All organizations operate within our facilities at 45 Hallcrown Place. These facilities also cater to the surrounding neighborhood at large. We have our gym facilities that are constantly rented out, and we have a 500-seat theater that also caters to the communities and other Canadian cultural groups at large. The community is generally active within the Canadian society, socially and politically, and part of the Canadian mainstream. ConsumerNext study and the public policy processes got the community involved somewhat after the fact and is now trying to contribute as much as possible to the process. Although the proposed secondary plan has its merits, the community still wants to see some adjustments. Following are some of the proposed revisions and modifications that we would like to see. The site adjacent to the community center, currently zoned as mixed use, should not be considered a tall building site, particularly in close proximity to the church, Hallcrown Place, and Consumers Road intersection. Provincial policy statement clearly advocates intensification and mixed use along avenues, but the intention is clearly low to mid-rise buildings along avenues. The OPA supports the planned communities along the same principles. The proposed 83-meter high building, as mentioned in the built form section of the official plan, neither is practical nor will it seem to be in context with the surrounding lands, especially on the south side of Consumers Road, where buildings are generally low to mid-rise in character. Second point, the density is another issue. We are in agreement to the recommendation proposed for the east side of Victoria Park, which recommend townhouse developments at the south end of the study area, and we would like to see the same proposed to the west-south side of Victoria Park. A density of 3.0 is currently proposed for the west side of Victoria Park for mixed-use parcels, which are comparatively high, considering the traffic challenges which we are currently facing today. Our recommended density will be 2 for both mixed use and the employment areas where 1.5 times the coverage is recommended to stay the same. We believe a density of 3 will be a direct threat to our community's way of life. Point number 3. Furthermore, the implication of mixed use, particularly in the south side of Victoria Park, does not mean a residential development with some
Suraj, I
retail
have to
uses.
Get you to sum up.
Okay. So, residential development with some retail uses up the ground and may be on second floor, as in the case for the large developments completed and underway along Sheppard Avenue East. The policy should further emphasize the employment aspect of the neighborhood, and even on mixed-use sites, the commercial portion should be at least equal to that of the residential square footage, blended in the existing commercial buildings in form and density. The last important point, the traffic congestion was, is, and will be an issue at Consumers Road. Employment area, even with the new grid system proposed, there will not be sufficient exits from the envelope, especially if the intention is to increase the employment numbers by some 60 to 70% over the next 25 years. While phasing in development may help, but it is not deemed to be economical in all cases.
Thank you, Suraj. Are there any questions of committee members? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Harut Kasabian? Just to the other deputants that are here, it is 5 minutes, and there is a clock, and most important is to tell us your issues that you might have with the recommendations of the staff that are in front of us. While I appreciate the history and the other significant matters there, we're trying to deal with what problems you may have in the staff recommendations, and that's what's important for us to hear today.
Yeah, like there are all similar problems. The congestion and the traffic is going to kill the community and the church and all that. I mean, but let me just go through it.
No problem. I mean, the clear and precise is wonderful, so we can ask after the staff to deal with the concerns that you're raising. That's what we're trying to do, is hear what your concerns are, and then give our staff an opportunity to respond to those, so we can then see if we are going to adopt their recommendations.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Harut Kasabian, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of St. Mary Armenian Church. St. Mary Armenian Church was established in 1983 and operated out of the Anglican Church on Bayview Avenue, north of Eglinton. Then the congregation decided to build a new church at 45 Holcomb Place in 1989. Next to the Armenian Community Center, to serve the spiritual needs of the Toronto Armenian community. The church was designed by late famous architect Cedric Rabi, a Ghanaian group who are the designers of the Rogers Center. The structure is an architectural gem with 2 domes, worthy of care and protection. The iconic view can be seen from Highway 401, Victoria Park, and Consumers Road corridors. It serves the spiritual needs of the Armenian community, having over the last 40 years at the area of the church, along Sheppard Avenue East from Yonge Street to Victoria Park and further east to McCowan. In the neighborhoods of Bayview Village, Wishing Well, Bryan Village, Down Mills, Henry Farm, and Victoria Park, north and south of Highway 401, serving congregation of over 10,000 people. There are 5 Armenian churches within the city of Toronto, and St. Mary Armenian Church is one of the largest one in the city. Back in 1989, when the plans were submitted for the building permit, there were heights limitations in the city of North York, about 25 meters at that time. Maximum. We had to alter the design to meet the requirements. Originally, we wanted the church to be a little higher, but we were restricted. We realized that Toronto, being a modern city, development is unavoidable. The city is growing and expanding. We are prepared to accept it, but because we're reasonable people, we followed and participated in some of the process of ConsumersNext study initiated by the city over the last 2 years. But unfortunately, we were not notified in a timely manner, and having missed the opportunity to have our community input to the OPA for mixed designated of certain areas within the employment land. We do realize there will be some changes to the neighborhoods surrounding the church. However, having heavily invested in the area over the last 40 years, to develop our social, cultural, educational, and religious interests of our community and neighborhoods, we are protective and concerned about aggressive development surrounding the church and the community. With residential high-rise construction projects we have observed along Sheppard Avenue, we have seen the devastation in that area. With mixed use being proposed at the fringes of the employment land, we will be facing new challenges from traffic and noise issue, which will be undermining our religious and community functions and practices. We are especially concerned about the nature of development form that is proposed for the surrounding area on the east and west side of Victoria Park Avenue, which limits and undermines and sometimes even hinder freedom of our religion practices and education. The following, however, are the main current issues and concerns raised and in the proposed secondary plan of Consumers Road employment lands. Traffic issue, the proposed new street of the church boundary, while having a new proposed municipal road, may have its advantages to relieve the daily traffic jam, particularly at the rush hours. Yet it also will present some negative effects to the congregation. It will hinder our privacy and will increase traffic noise level, increase pollution, and reduce safety and security within the neighborhood. Are major concerns. Considering the church structure being an architectural value of the City of Toronto, which may be added to the Discover Toronto list, should not be blocked by high-rise buildings within the vicinity of Consumers Road and Victoria Park Avenue. The 6-story podium proposed by the secondary plan should not be permitted. The OPA for mixed use specifically mentioned mid-rise development, and the high-rise should not be considered as an option. The proposed density along Victoria Park Avenue should not be as high as the proposed 3.0. We realize that the provincial mandate of intensification along avenues are given, but higher densities will encourage applications for tall buildings, particularly when 6-story podiums are encouraged.
So Harut, I need you to sum up.
Well, in conclusion, I guess we do request that all this to be considered in the development of this area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions of the deputant? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for coming and telling us about your church. Tony Volpentesta. After that, Denitsa Koev. Afternoon, Tony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Tony Volpentesta. I'm with Bellsfields Inc., planners and urban designers. I'm here today representing New York Investments Limited, Jarrell Investments Limited, and Newberg and Dale Construction, who are owners of lands known municipally as 2450, 2452 Sheppard Avenue East, which are located at the northwest quadrant of Sheppard Avenue East and Victoria Park Avenue. They're currently occupied by the Victoria Park Square Shopping Center. The existing plaza was built in 1972, has approximately 95,000 square feet of GFA. It's been a very successful neighborhood plaza whose tenants include Food Basics, Winners, the Bank of Montreal, and others. With the exception of the Petro-Canada station at the immediate corner, our client owns what we believe to be one of, if not the largest, single contiguous mixed-use designated parcel in the ConsumersNext planning area. I'm here today primarily to achieve two things. Firstly, given that the draft secondary plan was only made available a short time ago, the primary purpose of my appearance before the committee today is to simply request further time to consult with staff about the implications of the proposed secondary plan and its impacts on our clients' lands. And I have a specific request with regard to one particular map in the secondary plan, which I have on the projector, and I'll speak to that in a moment. I'm not going to bother you with the history of the plaza and our involvement to date in terms of the tenancies, et cetera. I do want to emphasize that our client is appreciative and grateful to planning staff and to the city's consulting team for the development of a comprehensive planning framework established by the ConsumersNext draft secondary plan, given the major planned transit infrastructure improvements. In addition, our client recognizes that its lands have been appropriately recognized as being afforded the greatest heights and densities in the area provided in the draft secondary plan. However, due to limited time available to review the plan itself, there was plenty of time to review all the supporting studies that led to this important document. Our client feels that it hasn't been afforded the appropriate time to review and assess the policies applicable to its lands and to determine the impact of those policies on future development. I would also highlight the fact that as a major commercial landlord, our client wants to ensure that the policy framework applicable to the commercial and mixed-use areas affords him the maximum measure of flexibility. There's a lot of concern on our client's behalf on the recent or latest retail closures, things like Sears and Target, and they feel that particular attention needs to be given to the nature of retail-related policies to ensure the viability and sustainability of retail uses. It is our client's intention to consider a sizable retail component into any future redevelopment of its lands to replace the existing plaza. Consideration is being given right now to a supermarket, a bank, a restaurant, etc. I should emphasize that there's no current application before the city with regards to these lands. And of course, the secondary plan provides the appropriate basis for that thinking to be advanced. So here I go to the crux of one particular specific area of concern, and that's indicated on the schedule 38-14 of the secondary plan. So that the concern relates specifically to vehicular access and the manner in which it could potentially be restricted in the draft secondary plan. Currently, our client has 4 full moves intersections that serve the site, 2 along Sheppard and 2 along Victoria Park. In combination with the Petro-Canada lands, which also has 2 full moves access, there's a total of 6 unrestricted access points to that entire quadrant. However, the draft secondary plan eliminates these full movement access points, replacing them with 2 right-in, right-out movements. Just highlight those in terms of where they're located on the plan. Right there. There's a new public road being proposed that will connect Sheppard to Victoria Park. And effectively, the secondary plan removes those full access points and then replaces them with right-in, right-out limitations. My client is effectively asking this committee to be given additional opportunity to review the planned removal of those access points with the city's own transportation engineers and its own engineers. If need be, it may be appropriate for our client's engineers to meet with staff to understand the assumptions and decisions reflected in the draft secondary plan. One of the suggestions, and this is a planner making a suggestion on a transportation-related matter, is to revisit the northernmost intersection of a new proposed public road on our client's lands that would connect to Victoria Park, and perhaps replacing that with an opportunity for full moves access. As one of the largest redevelopment opportunities in the secondary...
Tony, can I get you to sum up?
Yes. In addition to the matter of access, we just needed one matter of clarification, and I think I know the answer to my question, but I just thought it floated out there, was the matter in which density is noted on the schedules. I'm assuming that they are gross densities and not net densities. There's a bit of confusion because the implementation section in section 9.4 distinguishes net and gross FSIs and gross densities. Those are my remarks. Thank you very much.
Councillor Perks, you had a question?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hi, Tony. So the principal concern I heard from you has to do with the transportation and the access in and out of the site through loss of some signalized intersections.
Yes.
Okay. Was any of that discussed with you or your client or described in any way in preparation of the July 2017 Transportation Servicing Master Plan?
If it was, it hasn't been brought to my attention. I was not part of those discussions.
Was your client?
Our client had another representative who was just simply monitoring these things. Now that a secondary plan gets advanced and actually has these restrictions brought to our attention in a very noticeable and significant way, I'm just expressing a concern.
And was your client aware that for the last 9 years. It's been on the city's books that we were building light rail along Sheppard and that would likely have some impact on the number of signalized intersections on Sheppard.
I think it's fair to expect that the recognition would be that access would be for sure diminished along Sheppard, but not along Victoria Park is what he had been hoping to preserve.
Okay.
Other questions? Tony? So when did you come on the file?
Believe it or not, we were actually retained in 2012. We've been studying this block for an extensive amount of time, but we've kind of floated in and out of the assignment with this particular client.
So we're not going to council with this until the 26th of March because of the March break.
Having said that, there may be some time to consult with staff on the issues that are raised.
Can I ask you then if you could try and reach out to our staff between now and then, see if they can explain the issues that are there, and if there's still an issue that's unresolved, then try and contact us at that time to see if there's some other changes, because it is longer than usual before it goes there.
Okay.
And I see them shaking their heads. They'll be more than happy to meet with you in the interim and try and review that with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any. The next speaker I have is Denitsa Koev. Am I close?
Very, very accurate. I'm amazed. People usually get it wrong.
I'm on today, I guess. Thank you.
Just
Again, you have 5 minutes, so please try and watch the clock. I'll wait till you've got it right side up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Denitsa Koev, and I'm here on behalf of Heritage 7 Properties Limited, the owner of 2075, 2111, and 2115 Sheppard Avenue East. The site is indicated here in red outline. It's just to the north of the proposed secondary plan area. This is actually map 38-7 of the proposed secondary plan. And you can see that this site is quite small. It's a 1.47 acre site that currently contains a Tim Hortons, a seafood restaurant, and a tire and auto center. As you can see on the plan, what's currently being proposed on the site are two roads, one running north-south and one running east-west that bisect my client's lands. And then you also see the star feature here. There's two stars where park would be proposed. I don't know if I should be zooming this in or if you can see what's being proposed, but essentially the entire site looks like it's being proposed for road and park dedications based on this particular map. And as you can imagine, when my client first saw this mapping, when it first became available, they were seriously concerned because it virtually looks like the site would be undevelopable after the proposed dedications were taken care of. So my client retained a team of lawyers, a land use planner, an architect, and a traffic engineer, and has been trying to work with city staff to resolve this issue, unfortunately to no avail. The experts that have been retained by my client have provided a number of findings and observations. Those are summarized in more detail in Mr. Stephen D'Agostino's correspondence, which you would have. Mr. Stephen D'Agostino is from my office. But just to highlight some of the issues and impacts for your attention today, the proposed roads, when you look at the background studies, there is nothing in the transportation master plan that justifies either road at this location or any other location. So the proposed roads are not justified. With respect to the parks, the location of the two parks are equally unjustified, particularly if you look at the final report for this secondary plan that was, I think, finalized in May of 2017. And there are two recommendations that I would point your attention to at section 4.1.2 of the final report. Recommendation 3 is that large parcels be required to dedicate on-site parkland. This is not a large site. Recommendation 5 of that same final report is that smaller parcels be required to provide cash in lieu of parkland to allow for the development of meaningful parks. So in this case, I can't understand why there are two parks proposed for a 1.47 acre site. It's a small site compared to a lot of the other sites. Now, the impact to the proposed site as a result of the proposed road and park dedications, I don't know if you can see this, but our client's architect prepared it. And when you take out the road dedications and the parks, what you're left with is only 48% of usable area from the existing site area. Now that's problematic because when you factor in setbacks, you're basically left with no room to build what the city has envisioned through this site plan. And here what I have for you is an extract again from that final study, which is the massing plan, and you see the site is located. Well, that massing will not be achievable. It's simply not workable on our client's site. And effectively what the proposed dedications...
Need you to sum up, though.
Right, so what we're asking, based on the foregoing, is that staff be directed to remove both the park and the parks and the roads that have been indicated from the site plan, and in the alternative that this matter be deferred so that discussions can continue. But because discussions have not proved successful to date, I don't know that that alternative would amount to anything at this point.
Thank you. Are there questions of the deputant? So then I'll ask you, you said you've had discussions. You're of different minds with the city staff, if you have them and haven't resolved them. What was their perspective on the issues?
So I have not attended. The first meeting, I believe, was, there were two meetings. One was information only. Mr. Stephen D'Agostino from my office wanted to attend but was asked not to, I believe. And if I'm mistaken, staff can correct me. And then the follow-up meeting, there were some alternatives being proposed. I don't think that we have a response from staff on
Those individual meetings with your client, or when you...
They were meetings with staff and my client and the architect and I believe the planner.
And who is Mr. Agostino?
He is the lawyer from Thompson Rogers who is in charge of carriage of the file. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it today because he's in Orangeville at the OMB.
And your responsibility is?
I'm here to provide you with representations and our submissions and our client's concerns.
So you haven't been able to see eye to eye yet on it?
No, unfortunately not.
And you have an opportunity still now between now and council to further discuss it because staff will continue to visit it?
If that's the direction that staff gets, that would be great. My client has always been open to an opportunity to continue discussions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sevag Kupelian? Am I close again?
Yes, very close, thank you. Good afternoon, my name is Sevag Kupelian. I'm with the ARS Armenian Private School. I'm the chair of the board. I'm just gonna, I understand that we have 5 minutes to discuss my deputation, but I'd like to give some history on the school because it's very important for us and the viability of the school, the proposed development in the area. We have been established since 1979. it was phase 2 of the Armenian Community Center, I guess, development, phase 2 of the development. We opened our doors in 1979 with 70 students, and currently, since then, we have 620 students, 64 staff members, and almost 700 parents. And we have offerings from kindergarten, daycare, kindergarten to high school. We understand that growth is important for the city of Toronto, but we also recognize that growth should not be disruptive and work within the current ecosystem in the area. We have built a strong and growing community that has in the past raised a number of concerns over the gridlock and the congestion in the area. So we've been discussing gridlock for the past 5 years, but that congestion in the area hasn't improved. The development concept should be complementary to the existing neighborhood in terms of appeal with open green spaces and built forms to blend comfortably, and as such believe that this can only be achieved through low to mid-rise buildings with appropriate transportation grids and links to service existing businesses and facilities. When we talk to staff over the past couple of years, we always mention that transportation is very important to us, and transportation should come first before any major development happens in the area. The following are our concerns for the proposed secondary plan for the Consumers Road employment area. So basically we have two major concerns, and both of them are related to health and safety. Health and safety is very important for our student body and our parents, and I believe to each one of you. With high density, new development, increased levels of traffic will directly impact the well-being of student community and raise concerns with our parents. As you know, construction projects go to 3, 4, 5 years sometimes from initiation to end. We believe that will disrupt our daily life, and it will not be safe for our parents to be in that area. Currently, I don't know if you've been in that area, it takes anywhere during rush hour 15 to 20 minutes just to get in from Victoria Park, Consumers Road to drop off kids and back. So it takes 15 to 20 minutes, and imagine if you add thousands of car traffic in the area during rush hour. What that will do to our school. The gridlock will definitely threaten the survival of our school. We are concerned about this existing traffic congestion. We issued or signed 1,300 petitions to do with the 2450 Victoria Park Avenue, application, and we submitted to the group here. We believe that, again, I repeat that low to mid-rise mixed-use development, as suggested by the PPS intensification policy for avenues, is the best avenue for this. This 80-90 hectare employment land is surrounded by highways 401 and 404, and 401, of course, with two sides. We'll only have 6 to 7 outlets to the avenues, while normally something similar to this size should have double the number of outlets. If the traffic congestion is not resolved and not addressed properly, we believe that, as I said, this will threaten our livelihood, and probably we will not have any other venue but close and shut down our school, because the parents will not want to bring their schools if they're spending half an hour to 1 hour just to bring kids to school and back. We participated in some of the consultations that the planning department organized as community open houses and forums. However, we believe that in such large area, there wasn't sufficient time given, especially that we have a sensitive community with over 10,000 membership Ontarians. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much and for coming to represent the kids and the parents. The last speaker I have is Haig Bedrosian. There you are.
How do you do, Councillor? I should mention that my name was actually put on here in error because I did send in my deputation via email. I'm actually here to speak about the ACC, and I decided to take this opportunity, since my name is on the list, to just very briefly go over a few points. My friends and colleagues went over all the major issues. I'm here as a parent and as someone who's been in the Armenian community using the ACC, the church, and now for my children, the school, for decades. And the problem that I have with the ConsumersNext, I've been involved, by the way, with all the open house sessions and so forth, and I've made my views known. But I feel it's very important to speak here, sort of off the cuff, and let you know a few of the things that you should consider. First of all, character. This community center, the school, the church, really provides a great deal of character to that entire area, that neighborhood, and so forth. So it's all about community, and it's about politics too. We mustn't forget that that community center has been serving every level of government to get its point across for campaigning and so forth. It's been involved in bringing in Syrian refugees. CBC cameras and all cameras were there when the first influx started coming in. Why? Because this is a community that matters and cares and has history. 40 years. 40 years, if that's not long enough to define character in a community, I don't know what is. Now, I'm not attached to that immediate vicinity anymore, except for the fact that, oh yes, my aging parents still take part in all these cultural events with choir and other cultural events, and take part in many of Toronto's cultural activities representing Armenians. My children go there at that school, and it is a fantastic place, let me tell you. So safety is something that I definitely do not see addressed in this plan, any which way you cut it. Now, I am a 30-year veteran in animation, and I've done all sorts of stuff, and let me tell you, I know when I say you can model all you want, and I know that planners have modeled traffic flow and so forth, it's not going to turn that way. It's just not going to turn out that way. Let's look at Liberty Village. I live downtown, by the way. When I say I'm a citizen of this city, I'm an active citizen of this city, this mega city. I live and work downtown. I take my children all the way up there for school, and I'm very happy to do it because it's a place that really matters. But I find myself having to always fight, this is the problem that this community is having as well, for Kensington Market to maintain its identity, for other aspects of this city to maintain its identity. Everything has to be a fight, and sometimes it's worth fighting. But when you consider all the merits of the ACC, the church, the school, its history, really, should there really be a fight? And the reason why I mention that is because we've mentioned our points and we have not seen them addressed about the safety, about the character, about sticking to the plans that were there earlier that did make sense. This city has an issue. I'm going to wrap up very quick. This city has an issue. Living and working downtown, when we talk about mixed use, we're talking about bait and switch. Let's be completely honest. A parcel of land opens up, they say, oh, we're going to have a 3-story building with a food court and this and cultural stuff, and then switch, you get panda lofts. We talk about redoing other areas of town. Really, do we want to do that to yet another part of the city, considering the safety, considering the traffic, considering the character of the community, considering the lines of sight? People look forward to seeing that church, even if they are Buddhist. Opening it up to mixed use in that parcel of land that we are talking about north of the church essentially opens it up for cultural disaster. So please do consider that. And I will be speaking to the planners more to this point in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you go, I don't know if any of my committee members have questions, but you've been at the Armenian Community Center for a long time. I have trouble saying ACC because I'd love to go to a hockey game and I never get to go.
Sorry about that. We were there first.
See, the problem is you never trademarked the 3 letters. Then you could have afforded anything you wanted. But generally, this plan is, and to some extent, enhancing the business park in the interior and permitting residential on the exterior. That's generally what it's doing. And you're aware that a lot of this starts from the fact that there was an application for residential that the city refused and was appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board.
Yes.
It was approved. So even in your consideration, you know that now that the tap has been turned on for that, we're addressing the issues that we're forced to address. Otherwise, there won't be any management of that residential. So
I'm not sure.
with that in mind, I mean, what are the interior safety issues? You're talking about volume of traffic on the streets? Is that what the issue is?
Volume of traffic. If any councillor here has spent any meaningful amount of time in that area, you would know that it is unbearable. The combination of foot traffic, there is a hotel, there is a bisecting plot of land between the Armenian Community Center and church and the high school, the middle school, high school section. And there is not even a roundabout that sort of divides them. As much as the community tries to abide by the rules, the patrons of the hotel and so forth won't necessarily do that. So you get people barreling in and out. You have such, people have been hit by cars. It's pretty well documented. So there is that issue about safety. It's very real. People have been injured. People from within and outside of our community have been injured in that area. So that's a very, very important point. And it's something that, it should be paramount.
That's down a cul-de-sac, you just said, right?
Yes.
So how is this plan going to change that?
Well, how is it going to change it? Well, we know that people don't stick to just their parcel of land. With the, how is it going to change? It's going to be a lot more traffic. Like I said, if you stand there on any given day. Down the road, it's a cul-de-sac. What's that?
You're saying there's going to be more traffic down the road that's currently a cul-de-sac.
There's going to be more traffic at Consumers and Hull Crown, all the way down to the cul-de-sac. No matter what you do, no matter what sort of relief line you put in, that's great. There should be a street, you know, that divides the 2 plots of land. But it's not going to really improve the safety. More importantly, you can't have concurrently the development of the new relief line, this is the street that's supposed to separate the church from this plot of land, and build whatever development is going to be approved in that corner. It is going to be disastrous for us.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any other deputants listed here. Before we go to questions of staff, maybe the easiest thing for me to do is there's been a number of concerns that have been raised, and there's a plan in front of us. Can you briefly tell us the changes that are being recommended into this area? Because we know that we have to look at the official plan for it, and how the concerns are or can be addressed from the people that have raised them.
Sure, through the chair.
And sorry I never warned you about that before, but that's
okay.
That's what you get for coming here.
So I'm joined by my co-lead. My name is Christian Matreska, and I'm one of the leads of the ConsumersNext study, and I'm joined by my co-lead here, Guy Matthew from North York District Community Planning staff. We've worked closely together on this for the past 2 years. Really what the ConsumersNext plan is trying to do is manage the anticipated growth that was triggered through OPA 231, which redesignated lands, Councillor Shiner, as you pointed out, from employment areas to mixed use along Sheppard and Victoria Park, south of Sheppard and east of Victoria Park. And the idea being that while that mixed-use designation was coming into force, that the business park remain an attractive business and employment destination. So some of the ways that we've done that is by trying to address issues that were raised by all deputants today, like the lack of access to the interior of the business park because of an incomplete road network. So new roads are a provision of development, or requirement of development, whether on-site or off-site, and the growth management strategy speaks to that. This is the highest concentration of office jobs outside of the downtown core, so the idea is that we need to support that employment through additional amenity. One of the ways we're doing that is by providing for the ability for commercial retail to be throughout the business park in the base of office buildings, but special permissions for standalone retail along Consumers Road that would serve both the residential population and the and the employment population, and transition from like an 8-hour-a-day place where people arrive, work, and leave to more of a 14 to 16-hour-a-day place. Again, with the needs of business, we're looking at potentially establishing a business association, and our colleagues in economic development who are partners on this study are advancing those measures, as well as the only holds that we are entertaining in terms of metering development out as transportation capacity comes online is for residential development. So employment development can continue as of right to the 1.5 times as provided for in the plan, with limited requirements for built form, just public realm support, no height maximums. So with some of the large sites in the business park, some pretty significant buildings can be constructed in an as of right condition. And then along Sheppard and Victoria Park in the mixed use, I've already mentioned the hold requirements. The provisions for new parks are generally laid out. They can be changed through policies put forward in the implementation section, as well as tailoring specific ideas to certain locations in the business park. So the highest and densest uses at Sheppard and Victoria Park, because that's where we're anticipating new higher order transit and transit interchanges, with different characters being more different densities being more context specific, as well as based on their proximity to transit. And finally, again, transportation capacity, we've heard throughout the study for the last 2 years, is very important. The densities provided for in the residential areas cannot be achieved without these transportation moves, and we've implemented a growth suggested implementing a growth management strategy that makes development proponents prove to council's satisfaction that there is capacity in the system to absorb the growth, whether it's new roads, new streets and links, or new higher order transit along Sheppard. 3 minutes.
Thank you. And there's been a number of concerns that have been raised. We aren't going to council with this until the 26th of March. If you're contacted by the deputants that were here between now and the next 2 weeks, would you have an opportunity to review their concerns and then to provide to us an update when it comes to council as to the meetings that you've had and any resolutions you have or outstanding issues?
To the chair, we have met a number of occasions with many of the deputants today, and will continue to do that and welcome the opportunity to do that, and are prepared, if committee so wishes, for us to report directly to council on any additional comments or changes that may be appropriate coming through those discussions.
Thank you. Questions of other members of committee? Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's obviously a very important area. What has been the growth, the business growth in the last few years? What's been the record? I mean, I know the area fairly well. There's a lot of surface parking. It is not a walkable place now, but I haven't been there for a while, so I don't know. Has there been growth and new jobs coming into the area?
Through the chair, yes, there has been. The major growth has been American Express moved in office from Markham to the Atria buildings just before the study began, and we've been seeing growth even though there hasn't been new construction outside of the Audi dealership and the Porsche dealership. We're seeing growth in the existing building stock as tenants are making more efficient use of their space. They're putting more cubicles in, more desks in. So we've actually seen some growth even as the study over the last 2 years. We've seen almost 1,000 jobs added over the last 2 years.
Okay. So do we know where people are coming from and how they're coming from? into this area? Are they coming from, you know, sort of equitably from all over, like, you know, Markham, Scarborough, you know, North York, or do we know where people that are working in this area, do we know where they're coming from?
We did some early transportation work, which indicated that over half of the employees, I'm assuming employees, you mean, are coming from the beyond the 416 area code. There is a lot of east travel from the east, from Scarborough, in terms of within Toronto, and there is obviously some proportion of travel coming up the Don Valley Parkway or Victoria Park to the area, but more than half comes from beyond the 416.
All right, and do we know if they're coming by, what percentage are coming by car and coming by transit?
Right now, it's over 90% by auto.
By car, because it's not particularly well served by transit. And in the plan, it calls for a lot of new streets, and it calls for, you know, cycling paths. I mean, do we really expect? I mean, it's a very ambitious sort of cycling plan network that I see, if I'm reading it correctly. Do we really expect people to be cycling to work in this particular area?
Through the chair.
Will that only occur after the residential development occurs?
Through the chair, the cycling network is expected to attract trips from within 5 to 7 kilometers, of which 0 people currently cycle. The broader transportation moves include improving shuttle service to Agincourt or Oriole GO Station to try to capture some regional connectivity, as well as a potential GO bus service into the area. And of course, improvements to TTC service in the interim condition with better bus and ultimately high order transit along Sheppard.
Right, and once a, quote, you know, higher order of transit arrives along Sheppard, people would get, you know, dropped off at Sheppard, west of Victoria Park. Is there, how do you envisage people coming, you know, getting down to Consumers Road once they're dropped off, or down to Yorkland Boulevard or Settlers Road? How are they supposed to get from, you know, sort of up there to down here?
So there's through the chair, there is a number of provisions in the transportation master plan about that last mile of travel. One of the things that are included in within the policy framework is something called an eco-mobility hub, which would make bike share available or car share available for that last mile. Also, we would be improving the pedestrian conditions along Consumers Road, which are quite severe right now, with better sidewalks, more landscaping, and that retail component I mentioned, which would, you know, give some people something to do on their walk to the office.
And so this is the second, this is the report says it's the second largest employment area outside of the downtown area. How will this compare, maybe, and I don't know if you know this, maybe somebody else knows this, how will this compare to the first, in terms of employment and residential, to the first Gulf area once that's fully developed out?
Through the chair, the first Gulf area, we're looking at upwards, it's an employment area, so we're looking at upwards of 50,000 as a working number on our employment projections for that area.
And that's out to, what, 2041 or something like that?
Upwards of that, it's certainly dependent as well on installation of the Smart Track station, the Broadview streetcar, and the relief line station in close proximity to that area.
And so this 25 years out is looking at in the neighborhood of sort of 40,000 jobs, I suppose, or it's a little less than that. It's 30 to 40?
Through the chair, it's about 30 to 35, depending on, yeah.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Councillor Perks, questions.
To Mr. Livy. Mr. Livy, how many transportation planners do you have on staff in various departments here at the city twiddling their thumbs all day looking for new work?
Mr. Chair, none. Remember that question.
Thank you.
So I'll remember that question if you move those motions. Okay. Are there any other questions of staff? Not seeing any. I see, unfortunately, my colleague who represents the area had to be at the Police Services Board meeting, so she couldn't be here. What I'd like to do is I'm going to move the staff recommendations, and I'm also moving an additional motion. The acting chief planner and executive director, city planning, consult with deputants and report directly to City Council if necessary with any further recommendations as appropriate. And I'm moving that so those of you that still have concerns, on behalf of the acting chief planner, it will be the staff I would expect to be meeting with you, but If there's a way to resolve the issues or to understand them better, we'll do that. If there's requirement for additional information, we'll get that for council. If we can't resolve everything, there'll be a determination by council as to how we should go forward when it gets there. So, and I'm supportive of the staff recommendations. In regards to the ConsumersNext business park and what's transpired there, knowing of it for a long time, and the fact that we've actually had new businesses move in there recently in the last few years is terrific. There is a need for office space outside of the core, but to establish an office environment is very difficult because the demand is often for people to go downtown. I know major corporations that have their offices now, midtown, that were even thinking of going downtown, and that's the environment. And the city itself has land in other areas that could be used for offices, and it's difficult to start that. So from a city perspective, in a city building, we want to really try to maintain and enhance this area with the office environment. The residential, you understand the history. There was a site on Sheppard Avenue that was supposed to be employment lands, and at the Ontario Municipal Board, they allowed residential. And once one is opened up, other applications come in, so the city has had to respond to that by looking at how we would deal with both maintaining the employment uses in the interior, but allowing on the main streets the residential uses that have now been, and that approval process was usurped from the city by the province by saying it's okay to do it. So we're trying to deal with that as it goes forward. And I think it's a good plan. But I would suggest that any of you that wish, try to resolve the issues. I understand my colleague has also going to look at studying the further extension of the subway to Victoria Park, and so I don't have to speak twice. When the Sheppard subway was first approved, it was supposed to go to Victoria Park, and that was supposed to be the terminus for it. At the time, though, the funding was only approved to get it to Don Mills Road, and hence it was constructed there. But the vision was to bring it past the Don Valley to service this area and maintain it in office use and give the interconnectivity that's there. So if one of my colleagues is moving that issue, I think it's incumbent upon us to at least take a look at it, because it might be quite advantageous not only to serving this area, but other areas at some future time if the line was actually extended to there, and if an LRT goes along Sheppard, to start from that point, as even to put an LRT in to access the subway station that's currently at Don Mills, you're going to have to tunnel anyways. So the real question is, how do you do it? So I don't think it's unreasonable to allow that issue to be viewed in a manner to look at it in a positive environment and see if there's a basis or merit for it. So if that motion comes forward, would be supporting it. Councillor Perks, did you have a question of me as the mover of the motion?
Yes, I was wondering, because Councillor Carroll's not here, perhaps you could add into your motion and the local councillor, just to make sure that if there's a staff report being developed, that the ideas have been run by her first.
I have no problem with that.
Then I'm good. Thank you.
Great. So I will ask clerk to add those words in. Councillor Campbell, did you want to speak?
I do, yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a motion, and I'll just read that out. That council requests the acting chief planner and executive director city planning to report on the future construction of the higher order of transit into the Consumers Road Business Park, including the feasibility of extending the Sheppard subway line, line 3, to the Consumers Road Business Park, and a Class 5 estimate with specific reference to potential ridership from the Sheppard subway line, the number of employees served in the Consumer Road Business Park, and potential residential growth. So there are innumerable number of transit priorities and plans that we've considered. I've been told a number of times by staff that they will come back to us with a list that we will have to prioritize. There's the Finch West LRT
is going to be constructed, the Sheppard East LRT, there's the downtown relief line north and south, there's the waterfront transit, there's talk about the Eglinton West LRT, there's work being done on all of these in various fashions and forms. I really believe that the City Council has to make a determination, and of course there's the Sheppard subway, which we're waiting for further costing. City Council will have to make a determination, if not this council, then early in the next council, as to what the priorities are and how we proceed. This, to me, just makes sense. This is the second largest employment area in the city. The Sheppard line ended probably where it didn't end. I'm not necessarily saying I'm an advocate for it without the information. I would like to see the information. What I heard today is that a lot of people actually are coming from Markham. A lot of people are coming from Scarborough. Maybe it won't make sense to extend the line from where it is now out here. But I know that the Sheppard line as it is now is the most underutilized line of the 4 lines on the TTC. In the future, you will hope that that will grow, and that one day, if this were to be extended, this would serve this very large business park where people could come and go. This is a report request, and I think that it's our job as councillors to try to provide for our, the people of Toronto, the best possible network, and have a clear understanding of what that best possible network might be. And in my view, not studying an extension of the subway would be a mistake, and not having a look at it. So that's my motion. This is a very important area. I don't know how in 25 years it will look and how this particular area will be served. The last order or the last mile of transit is one that is difficult for an area like this, because if you are dropped off at Victoria Park or you are dropped off at Sheppard, getting down into the sort of the hub is difficult. Getting people to change their patterns when they have to move into the area and abandon the car is going to be difficult, and that'll always be a challenge. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Are there other speakers? Councillor Perks.
Thank you. First, I wanted to offer my sincere thanks to the planning staff who worked on this. This is an incredibly robust piece of work, and listening to the deputants, I can understand you were navigating a minefield. Well done. This is important and necessary work that you've done, and it's for a part of the city that really does need some clearer thinking in terms of planning direction. So thank you for that. And I'll be supporting Councillor Shiner's motion. It's always good to keep the conversation alive and to see if we can make an improvement. That being said, there are some conversations, though, that are just exhausting. Councillor Campbell mentions that he has no idea what this area will look like in 25 years. And I was thinking about that. Have I been dealing with transit plans on Sheppard Avenue for 25 years? And I realized the answer was no. In fact, I've spent 30 years dealing with transit plans for Sheppard Avenue, going back to the Provincial Rapid Transit Expansion Program, which initially proposed this. And not everyone in this room will know, but I actually filed with the province of Ontario when the original Sheppard subway was proposed, a request for an environmental assessment hearing, because the passenger volumes did not justify a subway. Now, the government of the day didn't support that, but the facts of today, 25 years later, do. Go stand at Bessarion Station if you want to see what a mistaken subway station looks like. Apologies, Councillor Shiner. We have studied and studied and studied and studied and studied this. There is only one corridor in the entire city of Toronto where more effort has been spent achieving less, and that's the one to Scarborough Town Centre. We recently had a bit of a political hiccup with the press being concerned about, and the public being concerned about the very dangerous levels of overcrowding on our existing subway, and we were assured that staff would be diverted with all haste to get the #1 priority, which is the downtown relief line, studied and ready to go. And I don't say it's the #1 priority because the mayor said it's the #1 priority, although he did. I say it's the #1 priority because City Council received a report saying it was the #1 priority. Councillor Campbell was on council when that happened. We have had report after report about what our priorities are for a transit network, and the only thing that makes it difficult for us to be able to hold to those priorities is that it seems every 2 or 3 months some member of council comes up with a new idea and throws it into the hopper and says, let's reprioritize. Frankly, I get embarrassed when I go back into my community and talk about how transit planning is done by members of this council. We have real work to do. Saying, well, why don't we bury Eglinton West, or why don't we consider changing the light rail to a subway on Sheppard, or in 1990 we had this different idea, puts us onto a merry-go-round where nothing moves forward except motions that waste staff time. I can't vote for any more of these.
Councillor Fillion, were you signaling you wanted to speak, or are you okay? So, with the committee's permission, I'd like to speak a second time on the issue of the subway. Inasmuch as I said politely earlier that the first leg was supposed to go to Consumers Road. And if you talk about a subway that isn't picking up all the ridership you'd like, the least you try to do is to look at the option that Councillor Campbell has said is there, is to extend it to one of the largest business parks anywhere in the city. And if you went and visited Sheppard Avenue, which I know our friends from the community do, it doesn't move. And not just rush hour anymore, it takes the full overflow from the 401. It is horrible experience to try and get along there. And the residents of the community that I represent suffer every day of the week trying to get to and from their home because Sheppard doesn't move, and yet they ask why we're permitting more development in the area. And that traffic isn't from the existing or the new development, it's from most of it outside pressures that are there. And as the deputy city manager is from Markham residence, so it's probably his fault when he was there. But the development that has taken place between Bayview and Sheppard would not have taken place without the subway being there. Those people that do go to work in the day, they get on the subway in the morning and go to Yonge Street to go downtown or uptown. It is well used by the residents that are there. There is a community there of, I would suggest, in excess of 10,000 new homes, and more than double that still going in along the line and being built as we speak. That could not be built without that subway. And that subway itself was required to support the development on Yonge Street, albeit it was supposed to be for commercial use because we were supposed to see an office environment on Yonge Street and it became residential. But the Yonge Street development wouldn't have happened without it. So my colleague, Councillor Campbell, is, I think, having a vision for the city that's inclusive to say, well, I don't represent the area directly, I do as council, and I think we should at least look at what the options are if that was extended, not in a manner to displace any other project that's in the city, but is it a project that's worthy of looking for the extension from Don Mills to Victoria Park, if you're going to terminate it there, and not even suggesting what the extension might be from Victoria Park out to the Scarborough Town Centre, or entering that issue. And if you don't want to look at that, then you're not allowing the plans that were actually put forward by city's transportation staff in the past, which is what was there fairly. It's not one that's made up by my colleague, it's one that's been there for years, and there's no issue that you should be afraid of looking at it. And that's what we should allow them to do. So I think it deserves the merit that he said to look at that, and I think it should get that support from us. So we have the motions that are there. Councillor, my motion first for consultation, further consultation. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Campbell's motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That doesn't carry. The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? None. That carries. Thank you. The next item that we have is Planning and Growth 27.3, 21 Don Valley Parkway, 30 Booth Avenue, 375 and 385 Eastern Avenue. Proposed modification to the official plan amendment 231 and area-specific policy 426. I don't have any deputants on that. I have the local councillor here. Are there any questions of staff? Sorry, members of committee and Councillor Fletcher, you don't have any questions of staff because you've had your questions answered. Are there any members of committee that have questions of staff? Not seeing any. We have speakers in. Councillor Fletcher, I believe you want to speak on the item.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Chair, for moving the motions that I gave to you earlier today. In particular, looking at the city lands that exist there. We have quite a few city lands, about 20-some acres, that have quite a large, important role as far as city services are concerned. There is parks is there, transportation is there, licensing and services, licensing and standards, and solid waste. So it's not, for everybody who lives in the south end of the city, this is an important issue because relocating these successfully to be able to service the city is very important. The other is looking at, this will be one of the first times that Create-TO itself will have this large 28-acre site in order to play this role around these lands and getting them, the services relocated and looking at what the master planning might look like. We'd be very, very interested in that. And the other is, should really make sure that there's film-friendly designs, and this was brought to my attention, Mr. Chair, a little while ago, that if buildings are built in a certain way and they have outlets and things with them, then there won't be a need to run cables. It would be kind of a very smooth, almost a film set on the go. And we have a very beautiful building that matches the one that's at down by the Berkeley Theater, which we also own, which is the, and like 51 Division. It's an old Consumers Gas building. It's a heritage building. Parks is in there now. And this asks for the general manager of Culture Division, Economic Development and Culture, to start looking at what role that might play. It's a very exciting anchor role in this new district for cultural uses, very definitely things the city would be able to support and to be a good incubator. So those are the motions that I have here today and look forward to support from the committee. We'll move another one at council that has to do with getting a clear pathway for what the relocation timelines and possibilities look like for the city services.
All right. Any members of committee wish to speak? I'm going to place the motion on behalf of my colleague, Councillor Fletcher, which you saw a moment ago. So on, and I will move the staff recommendations as well. So on the amendment that I'm moving, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We now go to...
I just have one other minute, Mr. Chair, just to thank the staff for, this is a massive file, and we know that, and I think we all know, and I didn't reiterate it, that it has the Gardner takedown, it has the mouth of the Don, the naturalization of the river, it has the smart track station, the relief line station, you name it, it's happening in this particular location. So it's a very thick, cumbersome file and working very hard, doing a very good job. It is also, it is an entirely discrete employment area, and of course, there are many developers that would like to get their hands on it for other reasons, rather than simply jobs, but we're managing to be very clear that this is a job zone for up to 50,000 jobs, an exciting area in the city, and possibly one of those sites where a very large enterprise might be able to locate at some point. So thank you for indulging me.
Next item we have is Planning and Growth 27.5, Townhouse and Low-Rise Apartment Guidelines. We have a few speakers on that. Danielle, where are you? You've been hiding out all day. We're here to hear from you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Danielle Chin, and I'm the Senior Manager, Policy and Government Relations at the Building Industry and Land Development Association. BUILD represents 1,500 member companies, which include 800 plus individual members that comprise of the Toronto chapter of BUILD. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about the city's townhouse and low-rise apartment guidelines. Firstly, I want to thank Chair Shiner and the members of this committee for allowing additional time to consult with planning staff from the last meeting. This additional time allowed us to have 2 key meetings with staff in December and in January. And I also want to take the time to thank staff for their dedication to this additional time. As you may recall, BUILD's working group has been actively engaged in this process since it was first introduced. Key sentiments throughout this process have been that conceptually, we believe that the guidelines are the right approach to providing the direction for townhomes and low-rise apartment buildings. There's been an ongoing concern, though, that the rigid and prescriptive application of these guidelines would actually reduce the number of townhouse and low-rise development unit projects. And that's because the more requirements placed on this type of development, the less likely it is to be viable in comparison to a mid or high-rise development on the same site. Ultimately, we want to see this type of gentle density happen to support the missing middle and in an effort to deliver housing that is more affordable, and that's why we have stayed so close to this review throughout the process. When I was last deputing at committee on this item, I talked about some of the concerns, which included the setbacks, separation distances, and spatial requirements, as our members felt that it basically works against the efficient and feasible delivery of this housing type that is typically entry level. That concern remains, but I think it's fair to say that the tone and the introductory how to read these sections section of the guidelines is much improved to allow for instances where not all the guidelines have been met, but the overall intent is achieved. And there's also been some positive clarification points added as it relates to the balancing of needs, affordable housing, transit-supportive development, and family-sized units by adding these key issues and objectives. Going forward, we definitely support the direction to monitor for 2 years the effectiveness of these guidelines, and we support the direction to conduct staff training sessions. We're also supportive of the approach to seek outside departmental direction in cases where the application, due to its complexity, may result in conflicting priorities. These are all very good and supportable objectives. In closing, I want to leave you with the overall sentiment that the guidelines are not perfect from the industry's perspective, but they are better than they were in its November version, and that's because meaningful dialogue happened in the last 2 months, more meaningful than it's been in the last 2 years, and that's thanks to staff and that's thanks to this committee. So I want to thank you for that time. Those are my comments, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Do any members of the committee have questions of the deputant? Not seeing any. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for all your help and your organization's help
Thank you.
in the last couple of months.
Thank you.
The next speaker we have is Alex Earthy, And Chris spoke. Are either of them here? All right, so you are,
Chris spoke.
so you're talking for Alex as well?
It'll just be me speaking, that's right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon. So my name is Chris Spoke. I'm a member of Housing Matters. We are a group of Torontonians who advocate for increased housing supply to address the housing availability and affordability crisis that is pricing many young people and middle-class families out of the city. We take very seriously the common sense notion that if we want more people to have housing in Toronto, we're going to need to build more housing. Through land use rules that constrain supply, we've made it effectively impossible to build enough new housing in Toronto to accommodate our rising population and new household formation. This is why we have a 1.1 rental vacancy rate. It's also why prices continue to rise so rapidly. The townhouse and low-rise guidelines are of particular interest to us as they address the so-called missing middle, meaning those housing types that are ideal for introducing family-friendly, ground-oriented, gentle density into our neighborhoods. It is from this perspective that we've reviewed these guidelines. We believe that though many of the items included may be desirable when applied judiciously to individual projects, when taken as a whole and blanketed across the whole city, they risk acting to further constrain the supply of these desperately needed housing types. By their nature, urban infill sites are limited in their size and configuration and require flexibility and efficient design to be viable development sites at all. Overly prescriptive design guidelines often act to prohibit the creative use of land or to prevent what might otherwise be higher and better uses. For example, the provisions to introduce breaks to townhouses every 36 meters in the guidelines or outdoor amenity space for projects of 20 units or more, while no doubt easily defended individually on their merits, can render otherwise desirable projects uneconomic. When faced with a housing availability and affordability crisis, we must consider these possible consequences. Each added provision shrinks the number of sites in Toronto that might be suitable for this type of development. Taken as a whole, these guidelines can act against the interests of viable intensification. Under these new guidelines, Manhattan's Upper West Side, Brooklyn's Park Slope, London's Kensington, and in fact most beautiful and desirable low-rise neighborhoods in major global cities would not be approved. In the background section of the guidelines, a number of key issues are listed. These include references to fit and transition to existing neighborhoods, parks and open space, setbacks and generous facing distances, quality of design, and more. Importantly, these also include a directive to encourage affordable and transit-supportive housing developments with a range of building types and unit sizes appropriate for families. We believe that this point in particular should act as the primary objective of these guidelines. How do we maximize the potential of well-situated, underused land in our city to create homes for people? Circling back to amenity spaces, although these are required per our zoning bylaws and are not introduced by these guidelines, we should acknowledge that these types of nice-to-have spaces can work against the provision of added housing in any development. Valuable land dedicated to amenity spaces reduces the space available for homes, which increases cost per unit. They also introduce to residents new costs to maintain. While shared outdoor space, including areas for pets and playgrounds for children, are absolutely central to the enjoyment and quality of life in an urban environment, these guidelines represent a missed opportunity to acknowledge that these spaces are often best provided more centrally and might not be necessary for every project of 20 units or more. This is the type of flexibility and recognition of priorities that the guidelines should provide to be used in complement with zoning bylaws. Family-friendly does not necessarily mean one playground per X number of townhomes, but it does mean being able to afford a home for your family at all. Further to this point, one stated purpose of the guidelines is to establish a balance between the protection of stable residential neighborhoods and heritage features while allowing for appropriate infill development and intensification. This is one of the main conflicts that arises with planning in any city, and we believe that when a compromise must be made, the balance should be struck in favor of encouraging infill and intensification. We should not continue to prioritize the concerns of established homeowners over those of renters and new home buyers. We must look forward. We have an opportunity here to cement the priority of increasing availability and affordability of housing. To that end, we request that you take our feedback into consideration when implementing these guidelines, when training staff on how to interpret and enforce them, and when evaluating development proposals and weighting the various trade-offs involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Perk?
Thank you for your comments. They're very helpful, and I'm glad to hear that there are people out there arguing that we need some more intensification in stable neighborhoods. That happens in my part of the city, but not everywhere. I was wondering, there are two different versions that exist. One was the one that we saw in November, and one that's here. Some specific things that have been changed from the November version is to take out some of the language that was to put in affordable units and make them just family units. Would you prefer the original language or that newer language?
So we've kind of analyzed the new guidelines. One thing that we think that was added in the latest version was the directive to encourage affordable and transit supportive housing. Our organization as a whole, we focus on housing affordability, meaning the affordability of market rate housing, and that's kind of what we're focused on here.
So I appreciate that, but if you look, so say for example, looking at the attachment where they show the changes, that's attachment 2. The first two things that are stated there actually water down the requirement for affordable housing compared to the last version. Does that meet with your organization's mandate, or?
So our organization has not taken a position on inclusionary zoning type policies.
It's not inclusionary zoning, it's the language in what you're
right, but the requirement to include affordable housing, however defined, those costs are often borne by the market rate units in any project, and we haven't yet gotten to that.
So you're agnostic on that?
We're agnostic on
that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions of you. Mr. Kettle, you've waited all day and we're still here to hear from you. You're a very patient man.
Good afternoon, Councillor Shiner and members of committee. I'm pleased to be here to represent Kathy McDonald's co-chair. She wasn't able to come. Representing the Federation of North Toronto Resident Associations. We are an organisation of about 30 resident associations in North York and North Toronto. We want to express our support, our strong support for the staff recommendations to City Council, including the townhouse and low-rise guidelines and their implementation. We especially appreciate certain aspects of the guidelines, especially the contextual approach, showing the evolution and the relationship between the various typologies of townhouses and how they sort of morph, through adding back and front and behind and so on, in a very sort of a systematic way. You graphically expressed in a way that the folks can understand, I think. And secondly, the principled approach to the statements of intent and direction, the new requirement for a block context analysis on large sites. So you actually see what the surrounding neighborhood is about in more than just a textual way. The practicability of the proposed actions, which seem pretty sound, and the use of case studies. And finally, the clear organization of the report and the use of graphical presentations. We have one matter that we'd like to raise to this committee. It's a matter, in one sense, it's a matter of detail, but it's a matter of some importance. The guidelines have been revised to incorporate several comments from BUILD. Most of those we're fine with. We do strongly object to some additional language in the introduction, the section called How and Where the Guidelines Apply. How do I turn the light on here? Oh, it's on. Good. There's a use of the word balancing, of the need for new development to enhance and fit within the area context and to accommodate housing in a growing city. That language is problematic. The guidelines are intended as design guidelines, not as land use policies. They primarily deal with questions of how a project will be developed, how townhouses will be developed, not with what they are and where they are, which are dealt with in the official plan, in secondary plans, and in zoning bylaws. We contend that the balancing is a higher order of business that should be done through official plan policies and implemented by zoning bylaws. Guidelines cannot be allowed to circumvent the official plan, but must be used to guide its implementation in a local context. So we've respectfully request some amendments to the specific wording on in a couple of places on page 9 to revert, in fact, to the original staff recommended wording As such, it is important to ensure that new development will enhance and fit within the local area context. And secondly, that the guidelines are intended to provide a degree of certainty and clarity of common interpretation. However, as guidelines, they should also be afforded some flexibility in application, particularly when looked at cumulatively. We believe these guidelines, when applied by the city and by the industry working together, will enhance the livability of the projects for residents and the quality of the public realm for the community. We congratulate city staff on accomplishing a well-designed product. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. So you're telling me as well that Kathy isn't here, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's the end of our deputations.
Yeah. I guess the question really, and there's been a little bit of discussion with Kerry Van Buckes, but a question of how do you make changes to the actual product? The 4 recommendations we're supporting. It's just a matter of detailed wording within the actual guidelines when they go out the door to the public as a finished document. And whether that's done by discussions with staff or whether you want to make a motion, that obviously is up to you.
Okay, thank you. So, before we go to questions of staff, since the last time it was here, and on a number of occasions, there's been opportunities for discussions with representatives of the industry and others. There are some changes that are here, and there is some advice as to how you plan to implement this. So do you want to take a few minutes to tell us the changes that were made, whether they're considered minor or major, and how you plan to implement these as their guidelines? They're not official plan policy.
Yes. Hello. Sorry. Through the chair, since these were before the committee in November, we've done a number of minor changes, I would say, in terms of the content. The most substantive action that we've taken is some additional consultation. We met with Build on 2 occasions. We met with, consulted with Fontra and with the Bayview Village Residents Association. Having done that additional consultation, we did make some minor changes to the content of the guidelines themselves. To my mind, they don't change the overall direction. What they do is the changes clarify their status as guidelines that are meant to be guided by the overarching official plan. So the wording does give clarity to that intent, in my opinion. Some of the other changes we made were we were more specific in the kinds of issues that we will be monitoring over the next 2 years. There was a discussion about dips, so we agreed to add that into the monitoring that will occur over the next 2 years. We also got more specific about the kinds of staff training that will be undertaken. So while these are basically a refinement of the existing infill townhouse guidelines, we did feel that staff needed to be trained. So we'll be out talking to staff and training them about the use and the intent of these guidelines. And I would say maybe the final change was some recommendations about the escalation of decision-making where appropriate in some cases.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councillor Perks.
So, I'm just looking through these, and it's a lot to absorb, because unfortunately the chart, the table that you've given us with the changes shows the build request and the city response, but doesn't show the original language. So bear with me if my notes are confused. I'm looking at the attachment to the very first thing that the change, the one that refers to page 8 sub I. It looks to me like the language that was taken out is that you're no longer requiring that there be a provision for a good fit with and transition to existing neighborhoods. Am I understanding that correctly? See how hard this is? Honestly, I have scraps of paper littering my desk back in my office trying to put these 3 documents together.
Sorry, through the chair, I appreciate your frustration. It is a little bit confusing to track the changes. The change was actually for it was 8 sub X 10, so Roman numeral 10.
But in your table, it says sub I. The very first line.
Yeah,
in
yeah, so there was a change in the
attachment.
numbering system, I gather, yeah, sorry.
So they're misnumbered.
This particular.
Councillor Perks, would you like them to go through
No, that's
changes?
not what I would like.
No,
I want to,
yeah, and then,
I have some specific ones.
okay, then go for it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It was a change in the order, and we have changed, added that one at the end, which is number 10. And yes, that was probably one mistake that we did, which is actually number 10. Yeah.
So the numbering changed? So there are a number of these that are about page 8 that I saw.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, we had this additional point that was added at the end, and we just did not change the numbering at this particular point on the chart. That was an additional new content, the city response.
Okay, so that one's in addition, so we don't lose anything in 8.
We did not take out any points from that section.
Okay. The top of the next page of the appendix, page 2 of the attachment, sorry, there's new language saying in some cases not all guidelines can be met in full, however, development may be acceptable when it respects the official plan. That's new language?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the bolded words are new language.
Okay. What is the effect of that new language?
The intent was to offer clarity about how and when these guidelines get used, and it was to recognize that they need to be balanced. In some cases, not all guidelines can be met in full. However, a development may be acceptable when it respects the official plan. So it was reverting back to the intent of the official plan in some cases where not every single guideline can be met.
I would just add to that certainly this is reflecting our lived experience in the last 10 or 15 years with townhouse projects, and we have this a lot with the mid-rise guidelines as well, that we may have occasion where you can meet 90% of the guidelines. So it's really just reflecting the reality of practice that we try and aspire to meet as many guidelines as possible, but we're ultimately responding to the development criteria that are set out in the official plan. That's the framework that we have to ultimately adhere to.
So
again,
I hear two different things in there.
Yeah.
I hear the effect of this is to say you don't have to meet these guidelines because, you know, you, like I, have had your soul crushed many times trying to achieve guidelines.
There's some
I also hear that what you're saying is it means follow the official plan.
Well, ultimately, the test of acceptability is whether or not a development that staff are recommending respects the official plan. Otherwise, it would be an official plan amendment.
I see. Okay, that penny just dropped. On the one referring to page 20D3 is, if I understand what happened here, when we're orienting perpendicular to a street, The preference was that they be a pedestrian muse, but the language introduced here adds something, says, or in some cases, a private drive. So this effectively changes what was proposed. So when there was a perpendicular muse running off it, that would have been pedestrian in the previous one, and now it can be a driveway. Have I understood that change correctly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is actually about pedestrian muse being visible from a private drive or a public street.
Oh, visible from?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm working from 3 different kinds of language that are numbered differently. Okay, I've had a lot of time. Why don't you go to someone else, and I'll come back.
I don't want to stop you from asking your questions, but I will go to Councillor Fillion, and then we can come back if you have more.
Have we lost some OMB hearings recently regarding townhouses and neighborhoods?
I'm aware of one, possibly 2, yes. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know there was a semi-famous one last year and then one very recently. I have not read those decisions recently.
So my next question was going to be, can you summarize why we lost them? But
I don't know if the legal staff have recollection, but off the top of my head, there were interpretations made of the neighborhood policies, the official plan policies, that certainly wasn't the evidence of city staff in those instances.
maybe I'll ask the legal staff. It's perhaps unfair because I haven't asked you to review the cases, but I believe the main reason we lost those cases was because of inconsistent wording where we said that townhouses were permitted in neighborhoods where appropriate, and that was taken as, no, if you say townhouses are permitted, we're just going to say they're permitted. I'm perhaps overstating or oversimplifying, but is that the gist of why we lost those cases?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we'd have to review those cases. My recollection is there was 2 or 3 cases, but without the decisions in front of me, I can't provide that advice.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk about them when I speak.
Councillor Perks, did you have more questions?
Yeah, I have another one. So,
sorry, Councillor Campbell, I didn't know. Did you have questions first?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so on page 34, we have page 34. So you can go to the appendix, I guess appendix 2, or you can actually go to page 34 of this, right? And the original version had generally provide breaks between buildings every 36 meters based on units, et cetera. And that's deleted now. Just like an explanation, I've had some townhouse developments go up in my area recently where I think there's breaks, but why would we not carry on with that recommendation?
Through the chair, that guideline actually still exists. On page 34, it's item G.
Yeah, and so I'm looking, okay, so I'm looking at the left-hand column, it says delete the underlined.
That was the suggestion?
When our response is do not delete the underlined.
Yes, correct.
Ah, I see now, okay. All right, so that's fine. So that's something we're still insisting on it. Got it, okay, and it's the same, I guess the same is true, because there's a recommendation that the previous page, for page 28, rationale paragraph 2, it's at the bottom of the previous page. New streets and lanes should be public, and they said delete that, and we still are insisting on we would like public streets as part of the guideline.
That's correct.
Okay, that's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Okay. This one broke my puzzler. On page 5 of the attachment, there are 3 suggestions. The middle one has two different things. One is to delete the following guideline, and the other is to edit the following guidelines. They both refer to page 32A. I can find nothing on page 32 that matches the language that you are deleting. Sorry, I wish I'd had time to just have you in for a briefing, but it's been a busy couple weeks.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the first paragraph that you see, that whole paragraph was deleted and replaced by the paragraph on the bottom, if you look at the chart. So
I don't see it in the original version. Was there some other version you're referring to?
in the November version, it is there.
No. There must have been a version that I never saw that was even better than this.
No, it was a version last time that was presented with the final report that had that language about the multiple residential development and the amenity space requirements.
So that is a change.
Yeah.
Is the effect of that change to delete the requirement for amenity space when there are 20 units or more? Is that the effect? And if it's not, why not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the intention is that we remove that from the guidelines because it belongs within the zoning bylaw.
So the zoning bylaw provides this protection that we get this.
That's right. And that's why we didn't feel like it was the right place to have it in the guidelines. Therefore, we removed it and directed how you design these spaces instead.
Well, just to add that, we felt it was repetitive to repeat the zoning bylaw in the guidelines. This was more directive as to how that space is designed.
Okay, thank you. I understand that one. Now, I have a question that doesn't relate to any of these, and I apologize for that. When this came to committee last time, I had discussions with some of you about a lingering problem I have with how some townhouses are configured that I do not believe is protected against in these guidelines, and that's the issue of having multi-entrance bays. From an urban design point of view, from the point of view of the attractiveness to the street, from the point of view of avoiding clutter, from the point of view of matching the form that exists in other places in the City of Toronto, is it not the case that having multi-entrance bays is bad urban design?
Yeah, through the chair, there are instances where it depending on how it's designed, it can add visual clutter to the streetscape.
And is the effect of eliminating those multi-unit bays going to be for some that you would force a number of units to use a single door, which would create a common corridor, which would then bring in a requirement that sprinklers be present under the fire code? Is that the central issue for why we haven't eliminated them here?
Through the chair, the preference for the market is to build units which have one door at grade and therefore avoid shared staircases and shared corridors. And if one avoids the ganging of the doors into either into a recess or a porch, what you get is them lining the face of the street, and that can happen in a kind of what I'd call a naked way with just a door in the wall, or it could happen with a porch. So there's some different ways of doing it. The effect of that guideline doesn't force the corridor. It tries to deal with either or.
That's not how it was explained to me in the three occasions I was briefed on this. So, first of all, leaving aside what the market prefers, our job, the only reason we have planning is to put some rules around the market. We just let the market do whatever we want. We wouldn't be at this committee and you wouldn't have jobs. So I'm frankly not interested in that. What I am interested in is how do we, like, I have experience, awful experience. I'm sure you can all think of the address in my ward of awful experience with this problem. How do I not have this problem? Because it is just, you know, ugh.
Through the chair, I'll just say that, I mean, we are trying to address this on a case-by-case basis, so there are instances where it's ended up being something that's not desirable. There are also good examples of it. So we are trying to address this through the guidelines on a case-by-case basis. I would say that one of the things that these guidelines do is extend the typology from just infill townhouses, which what the previous guidelines dealt with, to also looking at low-rise apartment buildings. And I think the problem that you're thinking of, in some cases, can be mitigated by using a low-rise apartment building form or typology rather than a townhouse typology. And one of the things we speak to at the very beginning here is making sure you're matching the right typology to your site and to your context.
So would it be helpful from the point of view, and this may be for the solicitor, if that's an outcome I want, is it not better to have that explicit in the guidelines rather than just say, well, look at it case by case, because the applicant can always argue, your guidelines don't say anything about this, it just says case by case, and my case is special.
Through the chair, I think certainly we'd be prepared to look at that from a broader perspective, and we can have consultation with urban design on that matter between now and council.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to put you through all this. It's complicated stuff.
Councillor Filling, do you have further questions?
If we took things out of the guidelines because they were more properly in the official plan, sorry, Councillor Brooks, I'll wait till Councillor Brooks is finished. If we took some things out of the guidelines because they were more properly part of the official plan, why did we then take some policy statements that are more properly in the official plan and insert them into the guidelines?
Light on. There we go. Through the chair, the guidelines were really intended to be an implementation tool of the official plan, and we try not to repeat them so that they remain independent. It's just
No, I agree with that part. It's the second part that I'm asking about. I understand the rationale for taking things out of the guidelines that are properly or are already in the official plan. Why would we take things that are policy statements that belong in the official plan and insert them into the guidelines? For example, while balancing the need to accommodate housing in a growing city, that doesn't strike me as an urban design guideline. Why would we take something that's a policy statement and insert it in a guideline?
Through the chair, I certainly agree with the general sentiment that we don't want the duplication. We don't want to set up a conflict. And we've increasingly put our eye on that issue as we have more experience with guidelines. So it's a fair comment. I think we've tried to be careful to limit any commentary on the official plan and the zoning bylaw, but it's a fair comment, a fair observation.
But thank you, but we just added some that have created that conflict, have we not?
Well, we think we can manage it because ultimately we have the official plan carries the weight here.
Wouldn't we just manage them better just by avoiding that conflict?
Or choosing other or better words?
Thank you.
Which we could look at.
So now we're into wordsmithing. So, Mr. Lintern, my colleague brought up the question about while balancing the need to accommodate housing in a growing city. What was that meant to say?
Certainly, Ms. Day can add to this, or Mr. Sorcy, who were involved directly in some of the discussions with Bill, but it certainly came from the discussions with Build around the ambition to make sure that we're achieving the most that we can out of these townhouse sites. And it clearly, you know, these are infill sites, and we all want to achieve a certain amount of productivity out of the sites, but on the other hand, we have a whole host of other objectives in the official plan to achieve in terms of creating livable, safe, appropriate environments for the people who live there. So that the intent was simply to insert a very simple statement around the balance that we always try to strike when we are reviewing development.
So was it to try and strike the balance to allow for townhouses? Really, when it said it balance the need to accommodate housing, isn't it really coming back to the guidelines? And isn't that the meaning of it, to allow grade-related townhouses in the city? Because there are multiple styles and designs that are required on every different site.
There are, again, I think
is it going to in any way, I guess, my colleague's concerned that a guideline is going to take the place of an official plan policy. So, well, that's what I'm hearing in it over here, and I'm wondering if that, and I think in the next one, it's also the case of saying all guidelines can't be met in full. So maybe to the solicitor, are we going to have any problem defending against developments because our guidelines have these words or verbiage in it?
Okay, well, first of all, I would just caveat with I hesitate to give legal advice of this nature about potential litigation in non-camera, but I will try and be careful about what I say. In my experience, I would say the official plan is always king or queen, and we are constantly told that guidelines are just guidelines, and so to a certain extent, I don't know, I think I agree with Mr. Lintern that maybe some wordsmithing would be a good idea, but I'm not sure that we'd be completely unable to defend ourselves.
Now, the challenge of our decisions is changing as well, where certain standards are going to have to be met about items meeting our official plan or not meeting it. So that's why I'm wondering if there's as much of a concern about a townhouse guideline having some of this verbiage in it, because it's not official plan, and our challenge would be whether the appropriate application meets or doesn't meet the official plan.
Correct.
So with the changes, are the concerns here maybe less of a concern because they're not official plan policies, they're simply guideline policies?
Well, certainly townhouses are not, or sorry, townhouses. Certainly guidelines are not going to be part of the new test under the Bill 139 changes that I think you're referencing. Townhouse guidelines are not part of that test, and conforming with the official plan is.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and yes.
No, they're not part of the test.
Yes, I'm listening.
Further to Councillor Fillion's questions earlier about the townhouse OMBs that we lost, I think it's important to make a distinction between the neighborhood policies, which we were attempting to uphold our interpretation of them, and in both the Keewatin, the Cambridge Avenue, and the Altamont hearings, which are the ones in North District, which you're probably most familiar to. Those are in your ward. Planning's position was that townhouses were not allowed in the neighborhood policies, and then, by the way, the form that the townhouses is taking is a bad form. In all three of those cases, Keewatin, Altamont, and Churchill, the land use argument that the townhouse was not an appropriate housing type was lost, and the urban design arguments that the form was bad and needed to be changed was upheld, and so we're revising each of those. And so when we write words like this, it will certainly take legal advice, because the guidelines are not intended to answer the question of where the townhouse is appropriate. It's a question of when you have a townhouse and the various forms of townhouses, how can we make them the best? Yeah.
Okay, are there other questions of staff? Go for it.
To the city solicitor, I just wanted to make sure I fully understood something that you said in answer to Councillor Shiner, and I think I have a way of asking it. Under the new rules the province has promoted, will guidelines matter less than they currently do, the same as they currently do, or more than they currently do, to the solicitor?
I would say, in our opinion, they will remain the same. There's no change to the test to involve guidelines in either way.
Thank you very much.
Are we all done with questions? Okay. So I will speak first, and I have a motion which will put forward the townhouse guidelines as recently drafted by staff, with all those words which they put together for me. But in essence, what I'm adopting is the last revision that's in front of us. Yeah, I didn't write any of the words. So clerk staff simply said to move the latest version. That's what I have to move. I'm not in any way amending anything from what that is. I want to thank our staff and all of the members of the committee for their interest in this, because townhouses and multi-unit dwellings are a very important part of our city for all of us. I think we share that across all of us here. We'd rather see that than we would in many cases mid-rise and high-rise buildings. Staff have impressed upon me, and I think all of us, the importance of having a guideline or a framework when you go forward to work with people that make applications. They did a tremendous job in bringing these forward, and at the end there were some concerns, not just from build, but from people that build townhouses and have done some very good townhouse designs that said they wouldn't fit under the new guidelines that were in place. So the discussions that went on, we're trying to find a way to make sure that the verbiage in here wasn't too restrictive where someone would interpret it as not permitting those better designs and allow them to go forward, while still allowing the staff to have some very fulsome guidelines to tell people what they'd like. And in those discussions, when some suggestions were made, on behalf of folks in the industry, the area that I brought up and staff brought up is, well, that may work for you, but there are people that don't build as nice as you build, and you should see some of the stuff that has come in. So certain things couldn't be changed for them. A lot of what I understand in the last set here is some wordsmithing to allow some flexibility of the item where it goes forward, but still each and every one of them are the staff recommendations where they believe that they can have usable and good guidelines to allow for good townhouse development within the city and a vision that's out there. What they also impressed upon me very much was the need for training and an understanding of what they are. And in that regard, there's the intent, once we adopt guidelines, to take them throughout the city to the 4 districts, to train the staff as to what they're meant, and to actually take staff out in the different districts to see good development with the developers and take those developers to see some of the bad developments so they understand why the guidelines are important as part of the educational process and ongoing training of staff, which is more than we've done in the past. Because having a guideline written and 2 people reading it, and one in Etobicoke and one in Scarborough, may bring us different interpretations of it, and we're trying to be able to be as flexible as possible based on the comments of trying to provide affordable, at-grade housing while still getting good design and good built form and a nice place to live. And that's what the problem was here. too many restrictions, making the entrances in certain areas was a concern of the industry, with hallways going through and losing internal space for the walkways through, and they would like entrances in other areas was their concern. The distance between the buildings at the different heights was a concern. They had asked for reductions, and they asked for things like, well, couldn't it be between this? And it was made very clearly no. Our standards have to say a number, because as soon as you do a reduced number, instead of 15 meters, 14 to 15, 14 is the standard. So it remained at 15. But staff had explained through the process that if something has to work to get a better built form, or not to take too much off of the building so the rooms don't become too small because the site is contained, they would look at those changes and they would report into what they felt was best, having the guidelines in place. I think it's been a tremendous effort in trying to accommodate all needs and make some small changes, and I don't believe that the end result is something that's substantially different from what was there. And I don't believe that having some words in here about talking about balancing the needs, or in some cases, townhouses can't meet all the guidelines. Well, we know they can't all. If it's a great development and it comes out to provide what we want, and it's good urban design, and it may not have the separation distance because it's off by ½ a meter, are we going to say no to it? Well, that would be up to the staff to make the determination whether it was appropriate or not when they went forward. And the issues of how the guidelines will be used at the hearings and even with the questions, I'm expecting that as we go forward under the new process, it'll be more based on do we or don't we ROP? And if so, there's no challenge to the recommendation of our staff when they go forward with the application. So I'm moving them as they are, but I'm also open if anyone has any changes that they wish to make between now and it coming to council, and they have those and they're acceptable. I don't see any problem with, again, continuing to look at it and see if those changes should go in place. But I think they should go to council in their current form, because so much work has been put in and we're trying to accommodate everyone in this case. And I think it's a reasonable result of the work that's been here, and I think it's great. And I really do want to express my thanks to all the staff that have put a tremendous effort into this so many times, who have really said, just get me something, get them onto council, let's get it done. And they want something that accommodates all of their desires and wishes. And I think that in every case throughout here, they are fully supportive of every recommendation that they have, and that they have not given up on anything that they don't believe should be in these, because they're a very fulsome set of guidelines. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. So to read my motion first, that City Council amend the townhouse and low-rise apartment guidelines, attachment 1 to the report, January 24th, 2018, as follows. In the introduction to the townhouse and low-rise guidelines on page 9, paragraph 1, delete the following words: while balancing the need to accommodate housing in a growing city. B, on page 9, paragraph 3, delete the following words: in some cases, not all guidelines could be met in full. However, development may be acceptable when it respects the official plan. First of all, it's really unfortunate, I think, that something that was a really good piece of work has now been mucked up to the point where I can't support it unless these changes are made. And thanks to Fontra for their diligence in highlighting these, and hopefully we'll make sure that all of the homeowners associations across the city are aware of these changes. I think only Fontra and Bayview Village were consulted with. So, Councillor Fletcher, it's really, Councillor Fletcher, it's just hard for me to, I'm not speaking directly to the staff, but it's just distracting. Okay, so there are, these are not innocuous changes. There are reasons why Build wanted them. There is not a small impact to this. There are several techniques that applicants use to win at the OMB, and you'd think that after losing more often than not, and especially losing on issues related to townhouses, that we would smarten up and remove inconsistencies not create more inconsistencies. So, for example, the main reason, my reading of the those decisions, and I haven't read the Keewatin one, I've just seen a summary of it, and I would add to the three that Mr. DeSorcy mentioned, the Sheppard and Bogart, which there was certainly a component that caused us to lose. And in all cases, the issue, or the cases that I'm familiar with in North York, the issue is changing the boundaries of the redevelopment area. So we have an official plan that says two things that seem contradictory. One is townhouses are permitted in neighborhoods, and here's the area where in our official plan we want townhouses. So to take a Willowdale example, you have Finch Avenue where we're saying to developers, please build townhouses. We want you to build townhouses here. Do they buy up those properties and build townhouses? Sometimes, but they'd rather go buy up properties on Churchill Avenue or Altamont because they can buy them cheaper, and they'd rather stick the townhouses there. So we lose doubly. Our neighborhood gets destabilized, and we don't get the townhouse development on the main street that we wanted. So that inconsistency has caused us to lose hearings. So we don't want any more inconsistency. The other thing that often causes us to lose, in my experience, Councillor Fletcher, it's really hard to speak, okay, because you're louder than I am, I think. The other thing that causes us to lose is when people cherry pick. So if you give a list of here's the 10 things that are required, and they'll pick whatever is most favorable to them and ignore the rest. So we know that happens. So what do we do here? We put in a statement here basically saying it's okay to cherry pick, you know, and both of these statements do not belong in these guidelines. This kind of wording should be in an official plan, but our official plan should be strengthening our neighborhood protections and strengthening our ability to say where we want to drive growth. And you know, so I can't, for the life of me, think what public good comes out of these changes. There might be good for members of BUILD, but it is certainly not in the public interest to be adopting these. So I hope that the committee and council, when we get there, will support deleting them and going back to it being a very excellent report.
Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Thanks very much. I have a motion. It's similar to the motion that I tried to move last time, which had to do with the problem with the multiple entrances in the bays. However, I can't move the one that I moved last time because the numbering has changed. So I'm going to move that the Chief Planner, Executive Director and Planning report directly to Council on the following items related to deleting the guidelines the permission for townhouse buildings to have multiple unit entrances accessed via exterior shared landings along public streets. And it just refers to the three areas where it was where I think it would need to be referenced. I think that allows the staff to do what I tried to do last month, but make it match the new numbering, and we'll have it there as advice at council to consider. Okay? I don't think it's a hard job. Look at, they're all smiling and nodding their heads over there. Look at that, it's so easy. Even the chief planner. I am a great fan of using townhouses as one of the tools for accommodating population growth in the City of Toronto. I might have a slightly different view than my colleague, Councillor Fillion, in that it's a form that fits easily into when looking at the existing character of the ward I represent, so it represents no threat, right? It's very easy to build a 4-story apartment building in my ward because there are already a ton of them. And the problem, the risk to my neighborhood and to the neighborhoods downtown is different, which is if we don't get the urban design right, then we go from, you know, elegantly appointed apartment buildings to hunks of junk. And I have had too much experience. I invite all of you to come and meet me one day at the intersection of King and Dufferin. I'll take you for a walk along streets with names like Joe Schuster Way and Mackles and so on. And you will see stuff that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, where every landing has 6 doors, and in front of every landing is an air conditioning unit, and in front of that are 12 blue bins, and it's just the worst urban form you've ever seen. And these guidelines solve many of the problems associated with that, but they don't solve the problem of having 6 doorways on a landing on a public street that forces all the things that would normally be interior to a building to its exterior. And why those nice old apartment buildings that we have, the 3- and 4-story ones, work is that those things that are now on the outside of those kinds of townhouses are on the inside. So you get a clean, attractive building front. It's a problem we need to solve. I acknowledge that in some places in the city, that form that I'm trying to recreate in my ward won't work. I acknowledge that. But I have spent my entire career on this council dealing with the mid-rise guidelines, and I know how, in certain circumstances, you give a little on them. But I also know that if you don't have a guideline in there that says this is the standard you are trying to achieve, you have no way of achieving that in any case ever. Right? So, you know, we have a guideline in the mid-rise guidelines saying the height of the building should be equal to the width of the right-of-way. I get that one maybe one time in 5. But I get it where it's necessary. Where it matters, I'm able to say there's a guideline here and it matters in this instance. If there is nothing in the guidelines that for townhouses that governs this very important point about multiple entrances onto the street, onto a landing, and everyone's bike and stroller and everything that they would normally store in a hallway being outside of the building because there's nowhere to put it inside the building. If we don't give me a way to solve that problem, I will continue to get people coming forward with junk. So I ask you, please, allow staff to give me some words so that when we get townhouse applications in the former city of Toronto and similar areas, we're able to get them right too. Okay? There we are. Oh, and I don't think this is too onerous because people who can't make money developing land in the city of Toronto shouldn't be in the development industry.
So, question of the mover of the motion for clarification from me to you. I understand the verbiage up until, if I'm correct, the colon, and that's asking, is it, but am I correct, is asking for words or is it asking for staff's perspective?
So, no, what it does, and this is the unfortunate thing about having 2 versions to work from.
No, but
when I tried to move this motion last time, I said subsection B relative to stacked townhouses and subsection C relative to primary entrances and so on. So the clerk, in an effort to make it coherent for staff, because those numbering systems have changed in this version, have just put that there. It's notional. It doesn't give them direction. It just refers staff to the sections of the townhouse guidelines where those issues are dealt with.
Okay, but are they going to, in your, because I would expect that if you're asking them to report, they will report, including if they are recommending it or not recommending it.
Sure.
Okay, so just so there's a, because I can't, I don't have an opinion.
That makes sense. Yes,
I don't have
that makes sense.
So if it is to allow them to look at your concerns and make recommendations as to how to address the concerns of the multiple doors and the garbage cans and the air conditioning units in the front,
it's the
that's
multiple
the intent?
Entrances that lead to that stuff, yes.
So, and staff understand what it is?
I think we do understand it. It's not automatic. It'll take some work.
Yep.
Okay.
Because it's located in different areas of the guidelines.
Right, and that's,
But it's to look at whether there should be that removed or how, it's to look at how you would deal, this is my clarification with
how you
yourself.
would deal with it.
How you would deal with the cases where the multiple entrances may not be appropriate and the cases where they might be appropriate?
If I, maybe just for some clarification, I think I understand your issue. It's my opinion that the guidelines actually do give guidance to it, but maybe in slightly too gentle a way, in slightly too many locations. So if I may, I think what you're
Part of the
asking.
problem here is that there's been a turnover in staff as these were developed, and I had a very clear understanding with this, your predecessor on this file about this. Perhaps if we sit down and talk, we can get to an answer that will bring something, so members of council have something to consider on this issue when we vote on it in March.
Yeah.
Okay?
We can talk.
Okay, now I understand what you're looking for, and they can come back and try and clarify that, where it might be appropriate to do so. Thank you. Councillor Fillon, did you have a question of the mover? Or is it a question of staff based on the mover's motion?
More like a quick comment.
So Councillor Fillon would like an opportunity to speak again. All those in favor?
Listening to John.
Make a quick
Opposed?
comment on.
Carried.
Yes. Just on this point, I'm all for solving the problem that Councillor Perks has described, but there are also instances, and I think this is what you were alluding to. I think I can think of one recently where I'm looking for more entrances than what was proposed by the applicant in order to create more of a townhouse look rather than apartment look. So I'm kind of supporting that we need to look at both ends of this and have them both work.
Support where appropriate and not where not appropriate. Okay. Do I have any other speakers? I'm not encouraging, I'm just asking. Okay, so, Madam Clerk, we have my motion, but we have an amendment to my motion, and we have an additional request from Councillor Perks. So, Councillor Fillion's amends the staff recommendations, which is my motion. All those in favor of Councillor Fillion's motion? Opposed? That carries. Then, next. My motion as amended. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Councillor Perks' motion. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So, that item is dealt with. We have one item left on the agenda. I really do again want to thank Greg and Lorna and everyone that has worked on this to bring it to this point, because you have what you wanted. You have a report going to council with very few amendments being asked of it. So thank you for all of your hard work on that. We have item number 6. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I would like
I'm
to...
going to do that in a minute. I'm going to item 6 first.
The problem is, my understanding is when we get to the end of the agenda, the meeting is over, so I...
No, I'm not going to end it. I
Not
have
going to
one
do that?
item.
All right, okay.
So I won't call it to an end.
All right,
You-
very good.
I don't have anything written up in front of me yet on that. So, because I've just dealt with the last item, Councillor. So we'll deal with one and then we'll go to the next. On item number 6, it was held by Councillor Campbell. Okay. Then before we do that, Councillor Fletcher had asked that we reopen the item on PG 27.3 for the purpose of reconsidering the motions. I will so move that. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. There is some amendments that Councillor Fletcher had asked to add to the wording. Staff have reviewed those? So would you tell me if there were any bells ringing in your ears?
Fine, thank you.
Okay.
It's ringing in every set of ears.
All right, so there are three areas where my colleague has asked that we include the underlying areas, and I will then place the motion as amended. All those in favor of the amended motion? Any opposed? That carries. The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. So now we have an in-camera item. So let us circle back for that. So motion to go in camera by Councillor Campbell. Planning Growth Management Committee recess its public session meeting closed session to consider item PG 27.6 as it relates to litigation or potential litigation that affects a city or one of its agencies or corporations or relates to advice is subject to solicitor-client privilege. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Leave, you had Councillor Fillion, Councillor Perks, Councillor Bilo, Councillor Campbell, and myself. This is John's last meeting with us here. No, this is his last committee meeting.
Does he know that?
At least as of today. So I thought because it's his last committee meeting and he loves them so much. Oh, he loves them more than council.
That's true.
Because there's more opportunity to comment back.
That's true.
That I thought it was worth saying, I think, from all of us, and I'm sure from all of my colleagues who run in and out of these meetings all the time and call you forever on anything that we might have, that you have been a wonderful, stable resource with common sense, good thinking, and the right abilities to make us do what you think we should do. But in fairness, for the good of all of us that serve here and all the staff, it has been my great pleasure to be able to chair this committee with my colleagues here, knowing that you are always at our side collectively and at the side of staff. You've been able to balance that in a wonderful way and to deal with all the issues that we throw with you day and night, week in and week out. And you will be tremendously missed, I think, by all of us. So it really, I thought it was appropriate, and we can put it in the minutes, to give you a heartfelt thanks for all of your dedication and hard work to the city in regards to our planning division and all the other responsibilities that you have. I don't think anybody will say anything about you at council because we'll forget you're leaving. But from this close group that's here, really, I think from all of us, we can't say enough. So thank you very, very much for everything that you've done and the great resource, strength, and leader that you've provided for, again, to us on council and I think to city staff. You will be sorely missed. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
Councillor Perks would like to ask.
I just, now that Mr. Livy's leaving, I can finally get it off my chest about how I met Mr. Livy. I've been wanting to talk about this during his whole tenure here. So back in the days when I did not own a tie or a suit jacket or a pair of dress pants, and I had a big beard and looked like a Mennonite hippie, and Mr. Livy had more hair than Councillor Fillion currently does. Mr. Livy was the Director of Policy for Metro Planning, and I was working at something called the Better Transportation Coalition. And unbeknownst to all of you, there has been a conspiracy to develop a war in the car going back a very long time. We worked on a project called Cities Without Cars with Richard Gilbert at the time. And my favorite, this was probably the first time any senior public servant anywhere had, thought that it was a useful employment of their time to sit down with me around the table with me. So I was very excited to get to know how senior public servants thought. I remember we were talking about, how do you make transit work on the inner suburbs? And we're looking at one of those maps with all the windy, twisty streets. Mr. Livy looks over at it and says, well, there would have to be some acquisitions. And that was my first insight into just how clear thinking Mr. Livy was, how willing to face difficult challenges he was. And we have been very lucky to have you as a deputy city manager. I'm deeply angry with you that you're leaving because we need you now more than ever. But I know that you'll be playing music and traveling and enjoying the world. And congratulations on a remarkable career of public service. And thank you for all the great advice you've given me over the years.
Thank you to all of you for the support. Yes. Have you tried to build an arena? I tried that in Markham.
No, that was your revised memo that never got published in June 2019. But anyways, that was it. So thank you all for being here, and thank you again, John, for everything that you've done.
My pleasure.
The meeting is adjourned. Here, for you, an actual gavel.